Okay, great. All right, everybody. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to start with an overview, and I see, of course, a lot of familiar faces that are tuning in tonight, and I want to acknowledge you and thank you for coming back because we asked you to, and we asked you to bring a friend, and I'm saying that up front too, so I don't forget to say it at the end, or just in case I do. Uh, if you liked what you heard tonight, and this is your first time, or maybe it's your second time, or your 27th time, or 227th time, bring a friend back to the webinar. Fourth Thursday of every month. It's a great way for us to get the word out in the comfort of your own home. So one of the things that I love to say is that the fair tax is simple, it's fair, and it's transparent. Excuse me. So I always love showing this next slide because our current tax code is an abomination. I mean, look at what we've got here, guys. We've got over 75,000 pages, I believe. This slide is slightly outdated. And no single individual could ever learn this tax code, right? It's Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid, and we've got to evolve. You know, this country is brilliant because we've evolved in so many ways. We've been leaders in so many ways, yet we're reticent to evolve our tax system, and we're going to get into why later on tonight, but there's a very small minority of people that are controlling, and we have got to step up in mass to communicate in mass to our elected officials and let them know, hey guys, either you co-sign this legislation or you don't get our vote and you don't get voted back in. So more on that in a bit. So the fair tax is going to evolve us, and what it does in its evolution is it repairs, if you will, or sets us on the right path and corrects what we believe are 7 areas that our current tax code is really regressive. Regressive not just in the financial sense, but in terms of being progressive in our modern times and what this country really needs to be a world economic superpower now and into the future. So, and we're going to show you this throughout the program tonight, how the fair tax really takes care of all these things. So our current tax code, convoluted, punishes growth, lack of transparency, it's inefficient, impedes privacy. There's winners and there's losers. There's mostly losers and a very, very small group of winners, and we need to level the playing field. And obviously it's, you know, filling out taxes every year is just not fun, time intensive, laborious, it's costly, and the fair tax, which is legislation that exists right now in the House and Senate, takes care of all these things. So we're going to break these down for you one by one and show you how the fair tax is the most powerful, progressive, and efficient performing tax system that we could possibly have. Now, by the way, $22 million of independent third-party research done by some very brilliant PhD economists were commissioned to create a platform, a tax legislation system to replace our current tax system, and it is the most researched tax system that exists for America. So what you're hearing tonight comes from some very smart people, not just a bunch of guys who thought, hey, you know, let's throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. All right, so the first thing that we showed you is our current tax code, 75,000 pages. Well, check it out, 131 pages, double-spaced. You can read this. Like, I have read this legislation. You can read it. It's simple, and sometimes simple is just right. You know, you look at Obamacare right now, and it's so conflicting and so polarizing for a lot of reasons. But I'll tell you from a personal experience, people ask me, so what do you think about this? And my answer is, I don't know. Like, how could I know? It's over I don't know, 2,000 pages, right? So imagine a 75,000 tax code. Like, it's crazy. We need to simplify this process, and the fair tax does that. So current tax code punishes growth. Simple. If you make more money, you have to give more to the government. That inspires the wrong behavior, right? So what do entrepreneurs and business owners want to do? They want to make more money and expand their business. but they're disincentivized to do that under our current tax code, under an income tax. And the fair tax inspires the right behavior. So the fair tax is a consumption tax, meaning it is a national sales tax, and you only pay taxes on what you spend, not on what you earn. And so the fair tax eliminates all federal taxes as we know it today. And I just was informed that all you can see are the poll results. I'm not sure why that is. Thank you for writing in and telling me that. I just clicked the button, and hopefully you can see my screen now. So the fair tax eliminates all federal taxes, and the personal income tax goes away, corporate income tax goes away, FICA taxes go away, the alternative minimum tax goes away, the death tax goes away, estate tax, capital gains taxes, these are gone, guys. And what we're left with is a national retail sales tax, which funds our federal government. And what we're doing here is simply funding our government in a more efficient and effective way. And as you'll see here, we've incentivized the right behaviors. So here are the benefits of what it would do to our economy if we were to implement the fair tax. So first thing that happens is $13 trillion gets repatriated. In other words, right now, there's $13 trillion in personal and corporate wealth sitting offshore, right? And why? Well, to shield it from income and capital gains taxes. The moment the fair tax gets implemented, that money flows back into our economy organically. So if you recall, 2, 3, 4 years ago, I don't remember exactly what it was, maybe it was longer than that, during the recession, the Obama administration literally printed $1 trillion that they injected into the economy. And of course, that has all kinds of long-term inflation, potential inflationary impact that we don't even know about yet. With the fair tax, the money comes back organically. What a difference. So what are business owners going to do? They are going to invest in what they know best. They are going to invest in their businesses. They are going to expand. So that is a huge, huge check mark in the box for the fair tax. So next thing that happens, we're going to have all kinds of international corporations relocating international headquarters here. We'll have the lowest effective corporate tax rate of anywhere in the world, 0. Right now, you see American companies moving international headquarters to countries like Ireland for this exact reason, because they save millions of dollars a year in corporate taxes. So what happens? Companies relocate here, they build infrastructure, they need to hire staff. It stimulates the economy in a big, big way, a lot of jobs, and a lot of people are going to benefit from that. Underground economy. Estimated $2 trillion right now. So right now you've got, well, because of the way our current tax system is set up, 50% of people, of households, contribute actual dollars to Uncle Sam every year. The other, through a bunch of loopholes and incentives, they don't actually have to pay anything. So the fair tax levels the playing field for everybody, and when you go to the store and you buy something, when you buy anything, you pay your fair share. Now we'll get into fairness in just a minute here. Rest assured, lower income class Americans will be taken care of so that they're not overburdened by the fair tax. So a bullet point that's not on here is that the average American's income is going to increase by 29%. Why? Because right now, if you are an employee somewhere, you get a paycheck, and on that pay stub, there's 2 numbers. There's a gross income and there's net income after taxes are withheld, right? So when you eliminate personal and Medicare and FICA and Social Security taxes that are taken out, and those taxes go away, guess what? There's only one number on the pay stub. Your gross and net pay become one and the same in the gross, in the bigger number that you would normally see now. So average American income is going to go up by 29%. People are going to have more disposable income than ever before. And what are Americans really, really good at doing when we have more money in our pocketbooks? We go spend. Some of us are going to invest, and some of us will save, but we'll be out in the marketplace in a force like people have never seen before. Guys, what you are seeing here is that there will be a tidal wave of new opportunity and new money injected organically into this economy when the fair tax gets passed. Very, very exciting. All right, so really transparent. Here's the example that I like to share about this, and first we'll explain it. So as I shared, there's only one tax, consumption on new and retail goods and services. So used goods are not taxed. 20 and the number is 23%. And so you will see, actually I'm going to go back for a second. You will see, so let's say you go to the store and you buy a pair of designer jeans and it's got $100 on the price tag, right? Well, the fair tax is inclusive, meaning it's embedded in that price that you see, and you check out, and on your receipt, it's literally going to say $77 go to the Gap, and the other $23 go to the federal government for the national sales tax. You see the number. The Americans right now, we have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. There's no transparency whatsoever, and guess what? That's what politicians want. They want to be operating in the dark so that they can maneuver, pull levers, make changes, so that when they come up with a project for their district, all they do is they tweak and they manipulate the current tax code so they can find some loophole to get their thing paid. Well, all that lack of transparency goes away with the fair tax. So this is a brilliantly designed system for the purpose of transparency, and it brings incredible accountability to our elected officials. All right, so right now we've got to collect from 120 million or more households. When the fair tax gets implemented, it's very simple to operate. So 45 states already have a state sales tax. We will leverage that infrastructure and create state sales tax bureaus, and they're responsible for collecting from the aggregate of the 50 states the approximate 18 to 20 million businesses. If you have an EIN number, a federal tax ID number as a business, then you're responsible, and that's it. And 23% of your gross receipts get set aside, and you got to turn it into Uncle Sam when your state sales tax bureau comes calling. So we get 80% more efficient by collecting from 80% less people. That's smart. April 15th, tax deadline, just another spring day, we like to say. So only one state sales tax form to fill out, which means you take your gross receipts for the year or for the quarter, and you multiply that by 23%, and that's what you remit. And then there's this incentive that occurs. You see the bottom bullet point there that goes to the state sales tax bureaus to collect it, police it, enforce it, etc. So it's just a smart system, guys. Now, here's what isn't smart. The IRS, $13 billion to operate. It only collects 75% of the taxes that it should, and the fair tax eliminates the IRS. So you know what? We've got a smart system here, and we've got a very small group of people that are trying to block it. We'll talk about that in a second. Your privacy is protected. You just pay your taxes when you make your purchases, and you don't have to fill out forms. The government doesn't know how much you make, and they don't need to. Let's talk about fairness. So there is a piece of the legislation in the fair tax called the prebate, and it assures no one pays taxes up to the poverty level. So this was a very important piece of the legislation that the founding researchers wrote in. And what they did is they said, okay, we're going to tax everything. The only thing that isn't is education. Everything else is taxed. And that means when you go to the grocery store or to the pharmacy or to the gas pump, everything is taxed, right? All new goods and services. So used goods like, used clothing, resale homes that have been lived in before instead of new construction, used vehicles, no fair tax levy. But every industry is covered. And the reason why is to eliminate loopholes, right? So again, very, very smart. The prebate was written in so that lower income class Americans are taken care of in a way where they're not overburdened by the taxes that they pay. So let's look at what that looks like. So let's just go to the right hand of the screen and go down to the green example there on the right. And what you're looking at is this. If you had a 4-person family, if you spent just under $32,000, then you're spending at what the Department of Health and Human Services has deemed to be the poverty level limit, meaning you're literally just spending enough to get by. You're spending money on basic necessities like food, shelter, clothing, transportation, medical supplies. That's it. You don't have any disposable income beyond that. So if you multiply that number times 23%, the fair tax paid on that poverty level limit spending is just over $7,000. Divide that by 12 months of the year. And what the prebate does is direct deposit $611 in your bank account at the beginning of the month to reimburse you in advance for the fair tax that you pay over the course of the month on your basic necessities. Fair, right? Now, watch. Every qualifying household in the country, regardless of income, gets prebate for their household. So you're making $20,000 a year, you're probably having a tough time. You get this new stream of income that reimburses you for your fair tax on your basic necessities. You're making $2 million bucks, you get rebated based on your size of your household, same amount of money, $611 a month if you got 4 people in it, right? So fairness, and we take care of lower income class Americans to make sure that they're not overburdened by our tax system. So we are propping up the underprivileged in that way. All right, so one of the most natural questions and a really, really important thing to talk about here is the impact on prices. So if you're just hearing this for the first time, you're probably thinking, wow, 23% national sales tax. That must mean that prices are going up 23%, so that retailers and businesses who sell to the consumer can pass off this new expense, if you will, to the consumer. Well, let's talk about that for a second, because guess what? Guess what's happening right now? That's happening right now. The cost to comply to the federal income tax code and actual corporate income taxes are deemed as line item expenses in a business P&L statement. So guess what? That's factored into the prices that we consumers pay. So we're paying really a sales tax in effect on top of what we pay at the cash register because the businesses offset that expense to us, the consumer. And of course, we've got our income taxes as well. Well, that is what we call the embedded tax. When the businesses pass off their expenses to us, it's called the embedded tax. 22% is what it's averaged to be. That's a real number, guys. 22% of business cost to comply to the tax code and their federal income taxes and everything related to their tax platform is on average 22% in retail goods. So we pay that. So when you eliminate corporate income taxes and FICA taxes and all these setting asides, the withholdings, the 22% comes out. So we free up 22%, we put in the 23% of the fair tax, and we've got not quite a negligible scenario, but close to it. It's estimated that average, depending on your industry, prices will increase 6 to 10% in the first year. So don't go thinking that everything is going to be jacked up by 23%. Not true. 6 to 10%. And remember, average American's income is going up by 29%. In some cases, much more than that. Plus, you get the prebate. Plus, you can purchase used goods. So the financial offset, the real dollar offset here is every single American is in a better financial position because of the fair tax. Makes sense. So we have talked about a lot. We've eliminated the 7, let's call them the 7 drags on our economy because of our current tax system. It's fair. It's simple. It is transparent. It's going to dramatically jumpstart, rocket fuel to our economy. Like you look at it and you go, this is a smart thing. Why wouldn't we do this? Because of special interests. That's why. Including our elected officials. I mean, this is the truth right here, right? So we've got lobbyists. 50% of lobbyists are on payroll from big corporations where they make 6 or 7 figures to lobby politicians to manipulate the corporate income tax code in favor of the corporations they represent. If the fair tax gets implemented, there is no need for a tax lobbyist, period. So guess what? They've got the ear of the politicians. They represent corporations that are dumping millions into re-election campaigns. They are saying, don't do it, and holding it over their heads. So that's one thing. You got politicians who don't want the transparency, and it becomes a very convenient way to demagogue and to say ill things about your political opponent. So in other words, if you've got a politician who's running on the fair tax platform or is a co-signer or supports it in some way, the opponent will say something like, yeah, my opponent wants to raise taxes by 23%. We're not in favor of that. Like, it's just ridiculous, right? Of course, they leave out, oh yeah, my opponent, by the way, he's going to get rid of the IRS and eliminate all corporate and personal income taxes. They don't say that. So, of course, IRS gets defunded over 3 years. They're probably not too excited about it. So these are the reasons why people aren't for it. It's a small minority who are acting selfishly, and we've got to stand up against it, guys. And we've got to influence and write and phone call and postcard and fax and email our elected officials every month and say, I'm for this if you get for it or you don't get my vote. All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to pause and we're going to take some questions, and we'll do as many as we can for about about the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll go back to our special topic, and we'll move through that very quickly, and then we'll go back to questions. So here we go. I'll ask my colleague Larry to take himself off of mute.
Done.
And I'm going to go ahead and launch these questions.
Well, you don't have to take the prebate if you don't want it.
And here we go. Okay, hang on, guys. I'm just fixing this. I had a number of great people just writing me in that all I could see is the poll. Okay, Larry, are you ready to go?
I am.
Beautiful. It says, okay, this question comes in from Jim. It asks, what are the total taxes currently paid in the U.S. versus the GDP? You get what he's asking, Larry?
Yes, I do. It's a little over $3 trillion. And I don't know what that ratio is, but I do know that the 23% that is projected or proposed on consumable goods, on all goods and services that are new, is such that the 23% is based on the GDP number, and that should equate to what the Revenue Department is getting now on the income tax. Mark?
Yep. Thank you, Larry. This is from Ralph. Do you have any Democrats supporting the fair tax? If so, who? So there are a handful, and I actually went to the FairTax website, Larry, and I couldn't find, they used to have a congressional scorecard where you could, and maybe it's there and I don't know where it is because they keep updating the site. Do you know, Larry, how many Democrats? It's obviously a small number, but do you know what that is?
Yeah, yes, fortunately or unfortunately, I do. Currently, there are no Democrats who co-sponsor or openly advocate or support the fair tax. However, when the fair tax was first submitted to the Congress, there were 3 Democratic co-sponsors along with 4 Republicans. Since Nancy Pelosi became the chief of the Democratic caucus, she put a stop to any sponsorship whatsoever, with the exception of 1 congressman out of Ohio who co-sponsored but has subsequently decided not to run any further. And that the real answer is no. Mark?
Yep. Thank you, Larry. Do you pay the fair taxes? Do you pay the fair tax when you buy stocks or bonds? So if I understand this correctly, Larry, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if it's an IPO, you've got this asset, this thing that is being sold at the retail level at the very first time, and the fair tax will be levied. However, when after that happens, you've got this now what's considered to be a used good, and the fair tax would not be levied in that scenario. Am I accurate on that?
I believe you are. That's yes. Let's say you are. And to go on to something that was not a first-time issue, like an IPO, there would not be a tax on the stock, for example, but there would be a tax on the service of whoever the broker is that sells the stock to you. Mark?
Yeah. So, Larry, a couple questions that are similar. How many total fair tax co-signers in Congress of the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate? How many do we have total, and is it the largest number we've ever had?
No, we're just a couple short of the largest number we've ever had. We do have a total of 71 in the House, 70 co-sponsors plus the sponsor, and then in the Senate, 6 plus the sponsor. I think we're about 2 short of the most we've ever had. I do expect that to pick up, though, because come election time, it seems that more candidates decide if they don't have the support of the fair tax group, they're not going to get the votes and get reelected. So they decide to become co-sponsors. That's kind of cronyism, but that's the way the system works.
Yeah. So this question comes in from Carlos, who asks, my dad is an independent contractor doing courier work for a lab company. He relies on deductions to cover the costs of his gas and tire and his vehicle, etc. How would the fair tax system work in cases like this? He would need more than the standard prebates, I imagine. Larry, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Carlos, the thing to remember with the fair tax is that there is no tax on any form of income, period. There is no deductions, period. So the deductions that your dad used to have to keep records of and file for, hoping to get back 25 cents on every dollar he spent, no longer exists, because now he keeps every penny he earns. And so he's going to be better off totally as far as the dollars in his pocket, which he has control over, than he does under the income tax. Mark?
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, this is from Wally, who talks about Popbox and whether or not we're using it to influence Congress. Thank you, Wally. So Popbox was something we're going to show you later, but I'll speak to it now. Popbox.com, and it's just spelled exactly how it sounds, popvox.com. We'll put it up on the screen later. This is a really great website, and what it is it a summary, as I understand it, of all the legislation that currently exists in Congress and the names and the numbers of the bills in the House and the Senate. And it allows the average American to go on there and do what I'll call an informal vote, like literally be able to click and say, yes, I support this, no, I don't. When those numbers get large, they add up and they influence elected officials, because obviously they want to represent their district's preferences. So it's a valuable website to know what's happening from a legislation standpoint, and it is also one of influence. So you want to go to popbox.com. Larry, do you know what they search for to look for the fair tax?
Yes, there is a search field. You can put in the bill number, H.R.25, and that will come up, or S.155 for the Senate version. And then in addition to clicking the big buttons that say either oppose or support, you have the option to add a comment of your own personal thoughts to let your representatives know what you want them to do. Mark?
Thank you. Lance, good question. Are there any current applications of the fair tax methods in existence? So one way that we reference this, if I understand, and I think I understand what you're asking, is like, is there any other country right now that has implemented a fair tax-like system? And so I'm not aware of a federal government, but there's a couple of states, Florida being one of them, that operate without an income tax and has a state sales tax. And there was a study done, and all the details are going to escape me right now. Maybe, Larry, you know, but the states that have a state sales tax and not also an income tax, in other words, they only use sales tax to fund themselves, are largely more in the black and better off financially than those that are that have an income tax. And of course, there's lots of other factors, but a pretty compelling study. Anything else you want to add to that, Larry?
No, Mark, I do not remember what the numbers are either, but it is significant.
Yeah. Yeah, so a few questions about that. The fair tax only makes a shift in federal taxes. So it is only for our federal government. There is no impact whatsoever on state or local governments. What likely would happen, as the fair tax gets implemented and underway, is that state governments will start to see the stimulation occurring across the country of the economy, and likely shift from an state income tax to a sales tax. But at this point, like I said, Florida, I think California is another, or maybe it's Texas, excuse me, that have done that. But fair tax only relates to federal taxes, no impact on state or local taxes. All right, let's do a few more. We've got a lot of great questions here. Thank you for writing in, everybody. And then we'll pause briefly for our special topic. All right, this is from John. John says, Congress has evolved into a governing class since the cost of running the House of Representatives is $3 to $5 million. Would it not be better to promote fair tax in a Congress restricted by term limits where running for office may not be so costly? Yeah, interesting take, John. Yeah, how can I speak to this? The fair tax legislation answers one critical question: how we're going to fund our government in an effective and efficient way. And so it will have an impact on lots of other things, like potentially people really taking a close look at term limits. And I'm one guy's opinion who really support that, but so far it hasn't been written into the legislation, or it's not some sister legislation that goes along with it. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Larry?
No, you hit it right on the button.
What is the actual trigger that causes the repatriation of the $13 trillion in offshore money, and how long will it take to see an influence on our economy? Thank you, Norman, for your question. The trigger is literally the moment our current tax system goes away. The 16th Amendment, which I failed to mention earlier, gets repealed, meaning Congress's ability to tax our income goes away, and the fair tax gets implemented on day one. That's the trigger, because as soon as that happens, no more can they collect on corporate income taxes and capital gains taxes. How long until we see an influence? Hard to say, but I would say that businesses within a year are going to start to expand as a result of having a lot of more organic capital at their disposal. All right, how flexible will the fair tax be for the various underfunded mandates that our federal government has us involved in? Speaking about Social Security, will be empty in a few years. Healthcare will be another one. What do we do in the event of a war when consumption often falls as industry retools for war? Great questions, Lance. Thank you. So first and foremost, on the first two, with respect to Social Security and Medicare, we save these programs because of the fair tax. And don't misinterpret, the fair tax doesn't change the percentage amount, to my understanding, of how much we allocate towards that. But when the economy expands, the federal government brings in more money at a dramatic rate. And because of that, we will have more money to actually fund these two dying programs. So Larry, I'll ask you to speak to that anymore, as well as to what would we do in the event of a general war when consumption falls.
Okay, Mark. To add on to the Social Security issue, I do want to point out that the fair tax was not written, and either is any other proposal that has been floated to date to address the onslaught of the baby boomers and the increase in entitlement funding that will be required to support Social Security, Medicare long term. It does, as Mark pointed out, because of the growing economy, put more dollars into the system. Also, the fact that now everybody that buys anything in this country is contributing to the tax system, whether they are here legally or illegally, is an aid, the fair tax being on a much broader base. Insofar as war, that's kind of a common sense answer in my view. Congress, according to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, has the power to raise and levy taxes. So if the need come to requiring more revenue for the government to build the war machine, if you will, they have the right to increase the tax rate at any time. Of course, because the fair tax applies to everybody equally, we all are affected at the same time by an equal amount. We're going to have some say as to whether or not they should or should not. If we're involved in a legitimate conflict, for example, we would probably say, yes, let's get this what we need and win this thing and bring the troops home. However, if they're playing games and playing a political war, if you will, we might say, Congress, you get your act together. We're not ready to give you more money to spend on needless battle and lose the loss of lives and maiming of soldiers, of our troops. So that's an issue that does not have a concrete answer, but those are the alternatives as I can see them. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. All right, let's just pause here. I want to move to our special topic, and Ron Malero wrote in, there's a great website I'm just sending out to everybody that should hit your control panel, Democrats for Fair Tax. So take a look at that website, and then we're going to get back to your questions. I just want to manage everyone's expectations. We have a lot of questions left. I'm going to move through the special topic quickly. But we're likely going to be on here. We'd like to honor people's questions. We're going to be on till probably 10 to 15 minutes past 9 o'clock, and we encourage and invite you to stay with us because we've got a lot of great questions. So I loved this. I loved putting this slide together. So when Larry and I talked about this as a special topic, it was one of these things where it was like, you know, Democrats have always sort of taken this stance that we're for the let's say, as Obama might say, Joe the plumber, right? We are for the average American worker out there and the masses of Americans, and you know, we defend all the classes, and they're a political party that has literally created a position around supporting the underprivileged and the middle class and bringing everyone together. And so I took this next slide from their website. And so what I want you to do is I'm going to read through these, but then I want you to think, and I'm going to speak to them, but I want you to think about the fair tax. So here are the core beliefs. Democrats believe that we're greater together than we are on our own. So think about it. We've got to engage a grassroots effort to get all Americans to come together to influence their elected officials to pull the fair tax off. Nothing like working together on that endeavor. This country succeeds when everyone gets a fair shot. Prebate. Everyone does their fair share. Fair tax levels the playing field. Everybody pays their fair share when they go shopping at the store for anything. Everyone plays by the same rules. Transparency. Our party, led by President Obama, focused on building an economy that lifts up all Americans. We just spoke to that. Democrats are working to make progress on issues like job creation. The fair tax will be the biggest job-creating piece of legislation in the history of this country. So there you go, folks. There you go, Democrats. Here's your platform. Go take it over from the Republicans, because everything that you say you stand for and all your core values is exactly what the fair tax would represent. All right. There you go. That's why any Democrats on the line, or anybody who knows a Democrat, get them on the line. Sign them up. So one thing that I want to say before we go to our questions again is, if you haven't done this yet, we want you to go to fairtax.org. You could also do it on fftea.webinars.com and sign up for the 1040 Club. And all that means is you support this for $10.40 a month. And let's be real blunt here. We need it. You got to have some dollars in your coffers, guys, if you want to advertise and influence and get the word out. And this is all grassroots. So if we had 100,000 people do just $10.40 a month, you know, we would create a huge opportunity for AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation organization, and it would make a huge difference. So I'm going to leave that up on the screen while we take some more questions. All right. Larry, I've got you on standby here. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I am. I noticed some hands up before, Mark, and you didn't address any of those people.
Let's do that. Thank you. Oh, good. Cool. So I'm going to, you know what? I'm actually, in the interest of time, Larry, I am going to ask Aaron and Cindy and Danny and Dave. Thank you for, and Jerome, John, and Richard, and Sharon. You guys have your hands up. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to write your question in if you haven't already, because if we open up the line for all of you, we're just going to run out of time. So I appreciate you being understanding of that, and go ahead and put your hands down. And let's move to our written in questions. All right. Larry, this
Yes,
is
sir.
from William. How will self-employed people earn Social Security benefits if they don't have to report their net income from their business?
Good question. Everybody will have their income reported in one of two fashions to the Social Security Administration. You asked specifically about self-employed. They will be required to report to the Social Security Administration their gross wages for the previous year, and that is explicitly so that Social Security admin can calculate benefits when they are qualified for them. In the event of somebody who is an employee, the employer will report those same gross wages to the Social Security Administration for the exact same purpose. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. All right, let's keep moving. I assume some sort. Okay, so we talked about this organization that will need to collect the revenue. We talked about state sales tax bureaus collecting from the businesses. Yeah, so this from Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Do mention how much is wasted in time and cost to prepare and file income taxes annually. So there's a couple of great books out written by Neil Bortz. If you haven't read them, they're really fantastic books. I mean, they're really well written. They're fun to read. They're very informative. In one of the books, they do a research study to aggregate and dollarize the amount of time plus actual dollars in the cost to comply to our income tax code by businesses and individuals. And I don't remember the actual number, but I want to say it was something in the $300 to $400 billion. And Larry, I don't know if you remember that, but it was a big number. And so you can imagine how reinvesting that time and actual dollars back into their businesses to make their product better and become more competitive would be a much better use of that time and money. Thank you, Jeff. Highlight the impact the fair tax might have on self-deportation of criminal aliens. I'm not connecting the dots on that, Larry, are you?
No, say that again.
Highlight the impact the fair tax has on self-deportation and criminal aliens.
Oh, sure. They do not qualify for the prebate. In order to qualify for the prebate, residents in this country must have a legal residence, which means they're here legally, not illegally, in addition to an active and validated Social Security account. That activation, that legality will be administered by and enforced by the state, just like the fair tax itself is, but it will be the Social Security Administration that actually pays the prebates. So if an illegal person here does not meet those two criteria, they do not qualify for the prebate. Therefore, they're paying the 23% on the very first dollar they spend. The cost of living for them will be going up substantially, and they may decide it's not worth the income to stay in the United States. Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, the fair tax or the prebate does not go to illegal aliens, as Larry mentioned, without a valid Social Security number. Also, one of our great longtime supporters, Dave Leake, wrote in because there's a question earlier about how the fair tax impacts Social Security and Medicare, and the fair tax allocates actually 27% of revenues to old age and survivors insurance and disability insurance trust funds. That's on page 111 from the 2012 fair tax legislation copy. Thank you, Dave. All right. Let's keep moving here. We got a bunch of questions. Stay with us, people. We appreciate you asking great questions, and we've got a bunch more to answer, so we're going to keep moving here. Who will administer and audit the prebate, Larry?
The prebate itself would be administered by the Social Security Administration, as I had just mentioned, and it will be the State Department of Revenue that receives the applications from those who wish to get the prebate and will validate whether or not they meet the qualifications. Fortunately, states do this now for other federal programs, qualify the residents and Social Security accounts of potential employees or businesses, and so it's something that is not new for them. The states that don't have a sales tax may not have to do that at this time, but they'll have some choices that will allow them to do it when the fair tax is implemented. Mark?
Yeah. Steve asks, what happens to a couple who are retired and live each on a pension plus Social Security and investment income that comes to 75 grand? Guess what, Steve? Congratulations. You get to keep you get to keep 100% of your 75,000. So there's no income tax. You keep that, and you pay your fair share when you go to the mall and buy a new shirt when you go golfing. That's it. So there you go, 75 grand, keep it all. Nice job. All right, what will prevent the federal government from jerking that beginning of the month claim around? The prebate, I assume you mean. I asked this question because having been a sailor and watching my 2 paychecks a month move forward and backward a few days as politicians try to play financial games. Yeah, thank you, Lance. You know, Larry spoke to this earlier. I spoke to it. We've got transparency. So what's going to happen is when you go to the store and you buy something and you look at your receipt, and all of a sudden that 23% fair tax national retail sale tax number is now 25 or 27%. In mass, tens of millions of people are going to literally melt down Washington, D.C.'s phone lines and email platforms and say, hey, what's going on with the increase in tax that we didn't get informed about? So that's one way. And then, of course, the Department of Health and Human Services governs what the poverty level limit spending is. We actually did a special topic on that, and you know, they use some pretty clean, relevant statistics and data to come up with that number, and it's pretty objective, Lance. So I don't think that's a worry that from a prebate standpoint that that has merit. All right. All right. Who came up with the 22% embedded tax, Larry?
That was done by one of the professors, the economics professors that was part of the research, and they simply looked at how much money is being received at that time by the Department of Revenue under the income tax system for income taxes, not for taxes that are outside the realm of income tax, like tariffs and excise taxes. But they take that dollar amount, and then they said, okay, what percentage of the GDP would be required to equal that? And 23% is the number. It was pretty simple. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. All right, from Ralph. Have you contacted Dr. Ben Carson and Marco Rubio regarding the fair tax? Larry? Have we officially?
Yeah, both of them. In actuality, I have been in communications with Ben Carson's campaign manager over the last month and a half. And I can't say I've had any really positive responses from him, but we are trying. As far as Marco Rubio goes, back in 2009, when he was first running for the Senate, he and I had some communication, some long, in-depth conversation about the fair tax. He had some concerns, I guess is the best word, about how it affects the lower income people. He had been involved in studying the fair tax previously, but he missed some points. And to make a long story short, after the detailed explanation, he finally said to me, okay, I got it. And from that point on, he was advocating the fair tax on his campaign talks wherever he went. A few months later, he was contacted by Dick Armey, the guy in Texas who used to be a congressman and a lobbyist, and Armey said he would like to give Marco Rubio his endorsement for Senate. However, Dick Armey is a champion of H.R. 1040, the flat tax, and could not give Marco the endorsement if he was going to be endorsing the fair tax. So Marco gradually transitioned from fair tax to fair tax or flat tax, and then eventually just the flat tax. And that's where he sits right now. And he says it's politically expedient more politically expedient to pass the flat tax than the fair tax. And if I get the chance to talk to him again, I'm going to ask him or tell him, Marco, or Senator Rubio, said, we sent you to Congress not to do what was expedient politically, but to do what was right for America. Why won't you do that? Mark.
Thank you, Larry. Really good stuff. All right, Jason and Carlos and a few others have questions and statements suggesting that the prebate isn't fair to people who live in states with a higher cost of living. So we've addressed this before. Yeah, here's the answer. Uh, you're uh, you've got to suck it up.
It's not as bad
And
as that.
yeah, and look, it's like America's hard enough, and recreating, a whole tax system for a government that needs trillions of dollars, uh, tricky, right? To do it in 131 pages, pretty good. It's not perfect, but based on what we've talked about tonight, it's a pretty good idea. And so ask yourself, if I'm losing out on an extra $100 a month, but I'm actually going to be making a lot more money because that's what the capitalistic system has created in this area of the country, am I really not going to support this thing? So sorry guys, that's my best answer, but at the end of the day, if you look at the thing as a whole, we're putting you in a better position financially with this tax platform. And so I invite you to look at the big picture and not get hung up on 40, 50, $60 a month, something like that.
Yeah, Mark, let me add to that, please, because it's not quite that bad. First, if you compare it to the income tax, the standard deductions that we all get do not change across the country except for Alaska and Hawaii. However, the pay scales do change. And if you're in San Francisco, for example, or Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C., you are going to be getting a much higher pay than people who are in the more rural areas. And so even though the prebate does not escalate because you're in the other area, the 29% increase in income you get is 29% on a much higher initial dollar amount, base amount. And if you're in the 25% bracket, that increase goes to about 40%. So you will be well compensated and have more spendable income, discretionary income under the fair tax than you ever had under the income tax. You don't have to worry about bracket creep anymore either. Whereas if you're making more money, all of a sudden you have to go into a higher tax bracket and pay a greater tax on it. You'll do that by buying a higher lifestyle for yourself. Mark?
Yeah, really good. Thank you for the color, Larry. So William wrote in back to the stock question on page 120 of Neil Bortz's book, The Fair Tax. It says stocks are exempt. They may have revised that since then because that book came out quite a number of years ago. So I haven't read through the legislation quite some time, but William, thank you for noting that for us.
Okay. I think the stocks are exempt, Mark, as according to the legislation as I read it. It's the service fee of the broker who is selling you the stocks that will be taxed.
Yep, good. From Adrian, how will food stamps and welfare be impacted by the fair tax? It won't be addressed in the fair tax because the fair tax is about financially funding the government. If anything, so that's a spending program. So if anything, with the increased and boost in the economy and more money in Congress's coffers, that program can be sustained or potentially expanded. We had some people write in about the not being fair living in a higher cost of living area, and some people wrote in that said move. Thank you for your opinion. Thank you for your comment, Elaine. The flat tax will stay flat for about 30 seconds. I love that comment. What is the estimated effect on the medical field? Services and supplies would be taxed. Is it estimated prices will go down? So yeah, whenever it's a service, right? A service is always administered for quote unquote the first time. A supply, let's hope it's always new. We don't want used syringes. But yeah, every time like it's service medical supplies sold, fair tax is levied. And is it estimated that prices are going to go down? Yeah, absolutely. Prices are going to go down because as the economy expands and gets more competitive, what are most businesses going to do to get more competitive? Lower prices. So it's estimated that prices will come down to pre-fair tax levels within the first 2 to 3 years. Let's see. Will the prebate reduce welfare programs, or will those remain? Again, I think I spoke to that, but those are spending programs that won't be spoken to in the legislation. Yeah, I don't think that they're going to impact them. I mean, if anything, with Congress having more money, they're going to want to probably try to spend more. So I don't see it reducing welfare programs. Same question. How similar or different is the FairTax? Okay, Larry, from JP, how similar or different is the FairTax system compared to the Swiss value-added tax? Compare the FairTax to the VAT.
Okay, I cannot compare it specifically to the Swiss, but a VAT in general is a tax that is assessed at each step in the supply chain. It is a relatively complex system, especially compared to the FairTax, and it is always subject to changes at any point along that supply chain. So if you're looking at somebody who's manufacturing a product that comes out of the earth and then goes to a second step and then a third step and so on and so forth, maybe 5 through 15 or 16 steps in the supply chain, the tax is added at each one of those, and then the consumer ends up paying it. The fair tax does not have that issue. There are no taxes except at the sale of the retail product or at the product by the retail seller. Mark?
Yep, thank you, Larry. How do we get the bill out of committee? How do we get Congress to do anything? If enough of their supporters pressure them into saying, we won't vote for you back in office unless you support this. That's how. Now, are there other strategies? Yeah, perhaps. We'd like to leverage our existing co-sponsors. We'd like to put additional pressure on congressmen and women on the House Ways and Means Committee, where the bill is sitting stalled. But again, all these people act out of self-interest when enough people in their districts say, guys, we want action on this, or we're going to support your opponent who supports this thing. So it's, how do we get it out of committee is really the same answer as how do we get this thing passed. We need what's the number, Larry? Is it 3,000 in a district?
Yes. 3,000 voters in a congressional district can change the outcome of an election, and it's best to be done at the primary, because then you have the easiest chance to get the votes for the new candidate versus the incumbent.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, guys, just going through the questions here, eliminating some duplicates. So this is from Lance. As a former city councilman, one issue I see that is the smaller the population, the lower the effectiveness of a sales tax-based system. This is especially true in a financially destitute area like Gloversville, New York. Smaller the population, the lower the effectiveness. Well, yeah, I'm not connecting the dots on that, Lance, because this is federal, right? So we've got the biggest population that are going to be contributing to this, the nation as a whole. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, Larry, but is there anything I missed there?
I don't think so, but I'm trying to grasp, I'm trying to visualize what Lance is really saying here. If you've got a small population, I think what he is saying is if you've got a small population, a sales tax won't provide enough income for that group, but they can screw the people by taxing them high on other stuff. Is that what the issue is, Lance? I don't know. Mark?
Yeah, this is a response. So Steve wrote in, retired, 75 grand a year, how do I get impacted? And I said, you get to keep all your money and you pay your fair share when you go to the store. And Steve writes back in, and I'm emphasizing this because there may be a number of people who have the same concern. Steve wrote back in, I understand that I get to keep the full 75K, but I have rent, groceries, insurance, doctors, prescriptions, etc. This is all taxed. By my calculations, my new tax will be even higher than I already pay by almost 100% or more. Steve, I mean, if you and I were to have a phone call, I could pencil it out for you. I would significantly challenge that because remember, you're only paying maybe an additional 6%, 6 to 8% across the board on the items that you purchase. You're not giving up any of your income taxes or capital gains taxes, and you're getting the prebate, and you can buy used goods that are not taxed. So I think if we were to add those up, we would have you well in a better position than where you're at right now. So without doing the dollars and cents, it's hard for you to might be able to see, but I just wanted to spend a little bit of time there so you felt a little bit more comfortable.
Is that $75,000 in your mattress, Steve, or do you have it in some kind of an investment that you're drawing on? The first thing is, of course, there would be no tax on the gains of that investment. The second thing is, don't forget the costs of goods and services that we are paying that we don't know about today are going away. So the cost of those goods and services will go down prior to the fair tax being added. So from that perspective, you're almost at an equal balance. The fact that you will have no income tax liabilities for anything else you might do, I think will more than outweigh, as Mark said, what your net result will be. According to research that's been done, and I've got a chart in front of me that shows the net average lifetime tax rates for a married couple with 2 children. You may be beyond that point, but this is a fair example that if your income, and I'm going to go to the $70,000 point, if your pension is going to have to be considered income, I believe. If not, please let us know. Under the current income tax, you would be taxed 19.8%. Under the fair tax, if you spent that whole $70,000 in 1 year, you would be taxed 12.5%. So that's a pretty significant difference. Mark?
Has anyone established an open line to Bernie Sanders? I have no idea. Good question.
Why would we want to do that?
Yeah, I'm not, knowing his or being somewhat familiar with his platform, not sure if that's the best use of our time, but to my knowledge, I don't know about that. I don't think that we've spent a lot of time there. A bunch of people want to know, Kimberly's one of them, how does this thing get implemented, Larry? Like, when is day one? How does it get implemented? Speak to that, please.
Okay, well, it's actually a little bit simpler than it might seem. When the fair tax legislation is actually passed, at that time, Congress will establish a date for implementation. For sake of the illustration, let's say that it gets passed this year in 2015, and Congress decides that at the beginning of 2017, the fair tax will be implemented. So that gives businesses from now until January 1st of 2017 to get software updates so that they can calculate the new federal sales tax and remit it to their state revenue department. Also, the legislation that is written right now says that at 1 second before midnight on December 31st, prior to the implementation, the income tax itself is abolished. All of the code is trashed. The regulations trashed. There is no longer anything for the IRS to enforce. That's why we don't need them anymore. Now, if at this point, at some point down the line, within the next year, Congress decides they want to try and reinstate some kind of an income tax, they could do that because the 16th Amendment is still in place. However, we feel very strongly that after about a year under the fair tax, the people of America will be so pleased with it that they will get on the phones and the faxes and the emails to their state legislators, letting them know, ratify the repeal of H.R. 16 now. let's get it done. And if you want to be reelected, you better start working on getting this done, getting your colleagues to cooperate. And the ratification will happen fairly quickly because of that pressure. Once the 16th Amendment is gone, of course, then we can, all have a glass of champagne and a toast that we've done a good job. That's about all I can put on that one, Mark.
Yeah, real good. Thanks. All right, we've had that question. So David's comment, it seems like the fair tax has maybe hit a wall as far as sponsors and co-signers are concerned. Why not speed up the process by educating people on federal jurisdiction? Stop feeding the hand that bites you. Not quite sure I understand that, Larry. Did you pick that up from David?
Yes, I did. Our mission, the Fair Tax Grassroots, is to educate the people of America. And as we go about doing that, also to try and educate those elected representatives who are willing to listen and who might have an open mind to it. But the point of educating the people is exactly what's the most important point, as you have brought up, even though you might not have realized why. Because like Mark pointed out earlier, when we can get 3,000 or more voters who are fair tax supporters in any congressional district, we can change the outcome of that election. I got to tell you, I think 90% of the people who have co-sponsored the fair tax today are a bunch of phonies. They are people who just wanted to get the fair tax advocates off of their back and out of their offices so that they could go about playing the game of politics that they like to play. Only 5 to 10% of them are really people who think about what can we do best for America. And they're not worried about saving the golden goose or the goose that lays their golden egg. So you got the right point. And the way we do that is for people like those of you who are on this webinar right now to get comfortable enough with your knowledge of the fair tax so that you can spread the word and educate more people. And also the contribution that Mark talked about, the $10.40 a month. When we get enough of that, we get enough supporters, enough advocates providing that source of income, that small revenue stream, then we'll not only have the ability to show to the big potential contributors that we've got a solid grassroots base who's willing to contribute not only their time but their dollars to this effort, but we'll be able to buy commercials and pay newspaper ads and stuff like that to spread the word that starts interesting the people even further. We're going to have to get to a tipping point where people start looking for fair tax people so that they can get a better understanding of what it's about. And we just need your help. We need you to go out there and talk to people to find out where there are events going on in your area. Within the next 45 days, I'm going to be heading up 3 events here locally. I'm in Central Florida, in Orlando. The Florida Federation of Republican Women, the Florida Democratic State Convention, and the Florida Republican State Convention. 3 big events where they're going to have presidential candidates in there. And we're going to have our booth in place talking to the people who are attending those events. They are the electors, the ones whose votes get cast after all is said and done. So you guys need to be doing that also. And if you don't have a group in your area that's doing anything, try to start one yourself. Almost none of us that are in the fair tax movement have ever done anything like this in our lives. So we're all learning as we go. But I've been on this now 9 years, going on 10. There's several people who have been in here 15 years or so, more. And then there are a few that have only been starting, right? Like maybe you. But you can do it. You can help us. You just have to make up your mind you're going to do that. Mark?
Thank you, Larry. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. All right. We received 2 new co-sponsors this month. Thank you, Elaine, for writing that in. That's exciting to hear about. Also, and thank you, Mike. Wanted to just also, I mentioned a couple of fair tax books by Neil Bortz. Those were co-authored by John Linder, who is the original co-sponsor of the bill from Georgia. He's now retired. And Rob Woodall, the current lead sponsor in the House, is the third co-author of the FairTax second book, Answering the Critics. So thank you, Mike, for that point.
An interesting sidebar on that, Mark, is that Rob Woodall actually did all of the research that John Linder used in his portion of co-sponsoring the first book.
Yeah, comment by Frank, and then a question. There's a great Facebook site called ECW, End Class Warfare. It's a place where liberals and conservatives come together for a common cause, the fair tax, and if we can do this together, who knows what else we can accomplish. I love it. So check out End Class Warfare on Facebook. All right, from David. I think you already spoke to this, Larry, if I'm remembering. David wrote in, when does a person become subject to federal jurisdiction? Did you already speak to that?
No, I did not. I mentioned Article 1, Section 8, and he is addressing that article, paragraph 17. A person becomes under the jurisdiction of the United States when they have sworn their allegiance, and that means they have become citizens. And that's part of the argument right now against the birthright citizenship, that those people who are born to illegals or people who are here on a visitation and not under the jurisdiction of the United States do not have allegiance to the United States. They have allegiance to their mother country. And those people should not be allowed to become citizens if they're born here. Mark?
Mm-hmm. Mike asked the question, and by the way, we've got just 4 or 5 questions left. Most of you hung in there with us. We're almost done. Thank you for staying with us. And thank you those who wrote in late and have been real patient. Mike asks, what's the impact of fair tax on nonprofits and churches? This is brilliant. So great study was done that asked the question, would you stop giving? Basically, in essence, the study said, would you stop giving if the tax deduction incentive went away? And the answer was no. We give because we care about the cause. And now Americans who have 29% or greater disposable income, or I should say average increase 29% in income and just more disposable income than ever before, they're going to give more. So churches and nonprofits are going to be big beneficiaries of the fair tax. All right, thank you. Joyce asks, Donald Trump said if he becomes president, we can fill out our tax on the back of a postcard. He would get rid of H&R Block. Interesting. Do you know enough about his plan to know how it compares to this? I don't know about the Trump tax plan. Larry, can you speak to that?
Mr. Trump does not have a tax plan, and this is the first time I've heard of him making this comment. What I did hear personally on the last debate is that he believes that the higher income people should pay more taxes, and he believes in having a higher tax rate for higher income people. To me, that's a progressive income tax like we have now. So if that's his position, he's either changing it or whatever it was he said that might have led you to believe that was not understood correctly, Joyce. You might want to go back and look at, go to his website if you can, or go back to the other debate and see if you can pick up the times when he was questioned and talking. Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, David also wrote in, you become liable to federal jurisdiction when you sign Form 1040. Are the CPAs going to fight this? Asked Jeff. Jeff, good question. I don't think so. You know, a couple of things come to mind. So number one, CPAs, CPAs do their best work when they're working on higher evolved or intricate financial work for the corporations or individuals that they're serving. I've heard that both personally and from several other supporters. And you know, we've got an evolution here, right? I mean, like the companies that used to make cassette tapes, when capitalism evolved to CDs and technology evolved, guess what? You either got with the program and you gave yourself a great opportunity, or you had to go by the wayside and figure something else out. So there's one thing's for sure, there's going to be a lot of financial institutions that need to verify income, right? We're no longer going to be sending in tax returns to get a mortgage. So that's going to be a huge opportunity for CPAs to do personal tax audits to see what people are making, and there's going to be plenty of opportunity for those that choose to evolve rather than try to fight it. When the fair tax talks to the competitive market driving forces, driving prices down, how does this affect medication with patients? Or, sorry, medication with patents. Did you get that, Larry?
Yes, and there is a point of truth in here in that question. If a business, whether it be a medicine or anything else, has something that is absolutely proprietary, they can, as they do now, charge whatever the market will bear. And so under the fair tax, they do not have that competitive situation, and they can charge whatever the market will bear. The fortunate thing in America is that there are new medications coming along very frequently, and there will be something to compete with that one or replace it rather than compete with it in some short period of time because the market is there. And then once that happens, prices will start coming down. But it's going to be up to what we're willing to pay. Mark?
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Last question, unless anybody wants to write in a final one. Why would flat tax advocates think that you would even need to fill out your tax return on a postcard? That's from Mark. I don't know, Mark. I'm not sure I can answer that, Larry.
Well, some of the proposals, the authors of them say that they're going to abolish the income tax system and put in their own flat tax system to replace it. And you'll be able to file your tax return on a postcard.
Gotcha.
My question is, how long do you think that it'll take for that postcard to grow into multiple pages? And as an example, and I have a copy of the 1914 tax return, the very first one ever created for filling in your 1913 taxes. There was 1 page of instructions and 2 pages of blanks to fill in with a lot of information on that. And look at what we have today, over 75,000 pages. Mark?
Thank you, Larry. So first and foremost, thank you, everyone. Those of you who stayed with us, most of you did. We appreciate you. We want to just share a few things here. Go get involved in this. If you liked what you heard today, don't let it be the last time. We need longevity here. Larry and I, Larry's been at it longer than me. I've been at it for 2006, so 9 years.
9 years.
Larry's been at it longer than that. You know, like anything worth doing is worth being committed to. And so we've got some websites up here for you. Give your time, volunteer, start a group. If you go to fairtax.org, you can go to grassroots and see if there's something in your area. Bring people to the webinar. Visit Popbox. We talked about that. Larry, speak briefly to the FairTax Power Radio show that Ron Malero puts on. He does a great job.
He does, and because of an email I got from him, we were discussing an article that was written by Steve Hayes, the president and CEO of Americans for Fair Taxation. I did not know that Steve had actually authored or co-authored the article about what would Thomas Jefferson think if he visited us today. And so I went and I listened to that, and it was about I guess about a 30-minute, 35-minute presentation. They did a play on the radio, and it was very, very good, well put together, and I got to understand a little bit more about what their program is. But Fair Tax Power Radio with Bob Paxton and Ron Malero is a hoot, and you guys need to try and get out there and listen to them. These guys have put together a radio program which can be heard at your leisure any time of the day or night. And you can see it on either YouTube or the SoundCloud.com channel. And just search for Fair Tax Power Radio on either media and pick the episode you want to see. Bob and Ron, they have interviews. They've interviewed senators and congressmen. They've interviewed Steve Hayes, the president, as I mentioned. There's some corn on there and some fun while they're presenting valuable information about the FairTax. And you'll also see pictures of Bob and Ron, and you're going to understand why they're doing radio and not TV. In addition to our webinars on the fourth Thursday each month, make it a point to listen to FairTax Guys on FairTax Power Radio on your YouTube or smartcloud.com channel. Mark?
Thank you, Larry. So listen, everyone, what an evening. This is just a phenomenal event. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to Larry and all the guys I mentioned up front for the promotion. Come back, guys. Come back fourth Thursday. Bring someone. Open your mouths. Communicate with your elected officials. And we've got something here. We've got an opportunity to do something extremely special for this country and for generations. And let's not squander it. So have a brilliant rest of your evening, wherever you are in the country. Thank you for being here. Come back and see us fourth Thursday next month. We will be here rocking and rolling, Larry and I and the gang. And we wish you all a great evening. Take care, everybody.
Good night, all. Thanks.